Hey everyone, it's Laura here from makingcardsissun.com, and it's time for another Saturday STEM Day carding video. In today's video, I'm going to be creating two nautical inspired cards using lots of WPlus9 goodies. So I'm going to start out with a piece of Canson watercolor paper and a dryer sheet. This is a little trick that I learned from Julie Ebersole. She's an amazing crafter and she has some really good tips. So I folded this dryer sheet in two, so it's a nice and thick layer. You could use any dryer sheets. I got a pack of some really cheap dryer sheets, so it works really perfectly for this technique. I'm using a die cut from WPlus9. This is a Crabby die cut, and I'm going to run that die through my Big Shop machine a couple of times, so I have 4 die cut crabs. Here I'm adding color to those scraps while they are still on that dryer sheet, so it's just easy to do it that way because the die cut is still in that watercolor paper. So I'm using some abandoned coral distress ink, just pressing my ink pad on there, and then I'm heat setting that color so it's completely dry, and then I can add the next layer. So I'm just going to add a little bit of the Festive Berries distress ink. I'm just going to add that to the top of that crab, and then I'm going to blend that with some more of that Festive Berries color, but I mixed some water in there. So I sprayed some water. I pressed my ink pad onto my craft sheet and then I sprayed some water on there. So it's like a really nice watercolor mix, and then I'm just using that to blend that all together. So I'm also going to heat set this piece before I am going to continue creating these little cute crabs. So I have a piece of painter's tape over here, and I put that onto my craft sheet with the sticky side up, so I can just easily adhere those scraps onto that piece of painter's tape. It's just easier that way to finish up these scraps. So I put a little bit of multimedia matte onto my craft sheet, and then I'm adhering some googly eyes from Pretty Pink Posh. These are called the Silly Eyes, and I'm using the smallest ones. So I'm just using my tweezers to dab those little googly eyes into that glue, and then I can easily adhere them onto the crabs. Then I wanted to have like a little bit of a watercolor background, and I'm going to use the Dockside background stamp set from WPlus9 for that, along with Mermaid Lagoon distress ink. So I put that stamp onto my Fisker stamp press. You could also just use an acrylic block or a MISTI tool. And I inked up my ink pad, and then I'm going to spray some water on there using my mister. I did about 3 mists of water, and I held my mister a little further away from the stamp because you don't want it to get too wet, otherwise it will become a blurry mess and you won't be able to see the shape of the anchor. And another tip that I want to share with you is that you can't press your stamp press or your ink pads too hard, because otherwise you will also end up with a blurry mess. So I like to clean my stamp in between stamping because otherwise it gets too wet, and then just like I mentioned before, you won't get like a really nice and crisp result. So once it's all dry, it will look like some hand painted anchors, which I think is just a really nice touch on this card. I wanted to add a little bit of glitter to these crabs, so I have a little bit of multimedia matte, and I'm going to apply that onto the top of those scraps using a paintbrush. You don't have to use a paintbrush, you could also just use your fingers to apply it, or just even like a cotton bud. It's really up to you. And I'm just sprinkling on some Tim Holtz Distress glitter. This is the clear rock candy color. So I'm just going to tap off the excess, and then you will have a nice and glittery crab. I just couldn't resist to make another sequin shaker card. So I die cut a circle using some WPlus9 circle dies, and then I'm going to put a lot of adhesive on the back of that piece of paper using my ATG, so I can easily adhere a piece of acetate on there. These are the plastic sheets from Lifestyle Crafts. I prefer to create sequin shaker cards with fun foam. You could also use just regular foam adhesive. So I have a piece of fun foam over here, and I'm going to cut a circle out of it. You could also die cut the circle, but I think that just cutting it with scissors is easier because you know, nobody is going to see the circle that you cut. So you do want to make sure that you put all of the sequins in the center of that circle, because that circle is larger than the circle on the anchor piece. So you want to put them in the center and then make them nice and flat so it matches the circle of that shaker. So I put some ATG on that anchor piece and then I closed my shaker. I am using the Laura's Dreamy Blues sequin shaker mix from the ton, by the way. Then for my sentiment, I am using the monogrammed stamp set by WPlus9, and I am using some Versamark ink to stamp that down, and then I sprinkled on some Atlantic Sea Spray embossing powder by Wow. This is a light blue embossing powder with a gold sparkle in it. I cut those two sentiment pieces a little bit smaller, and then I adhered them onto my card using my ATG gun. So I'm just positioning that on there with my EK Success tweezers, and then I'm also adhering those scraps on there with some foam adhesive. So that finishes up the first card. Then for my second card, I am using the Dock Sides stamp set from WPlus9 to stamp my sentiment on there. So here I'm going to use a dryer sheet to prevent the embossing powder from sticking to areas where you don't want it. I also use kitchen flour, but since I had a dryer sheet on my desk, I decided to try that out. So for this card, I did the same. I created the same background. I created some more crabs, so I'm not going to show that again since I did that in the beginning of the video. I'm going to die cut that piece using a die cut from the Catherine Cutaways die cut set from Winnie & Walter, and then I'm going to adhere that onto some navy cardstock from WPlus9. Before I'm going to do that, I'm just going to adhere a piece of black shape and tape from Your Memory Keepers. I cut that to a really thin strip and I can just easily adhere it on there. And I'm also going to adhere the sentiment banner that we created earlier in the video. So I'm just adhering that on there with some foam adhesive. Then next I'm going to adhere that piece of paper onto that navy card using my ATG. And then I wanted to have an extra backdrop for these scraps, so I'm going to put some white thread on there, just kind of looping it. It's just really random and it doesn't have to be perfect at all. So I'm adhering those scraps on there using some foam adhesive. This adhesive should be enough to hold the twine down, but I'm also going to adhere a couple of sequins from the top because you know that I love my sequins. So I'm adhering those using my EK Success tweezers and some glossy accents. And that finishes up my 2 cards for this week's Saturday Stamp Day video. Be sure to visit my blog for more details and check out the YouTube video description for a supply list. Thanks for watching. I'll see you very soon. Bye bye.